Okay, so this simple little replace a gasket and seal job is a little bit more complicated. So I've put the gasket and the seal on, and then I've put the plate in, and you push the plate up, and then I've started bolting it down with the bolts, and you can probably just about make out, but there's a gap between the plate and the crankcase. Now, in all honesty, I have had this engine apart before, but I didn't press that bearing in. And what I believe this bearing here should be pressed in further, and there should be a recess in the crankcase that this step on this plate fits into, and that's going to partially form the seal on the shoulder of the step against the crankcase, and then the actual seal is going to be where the gasket is, which we have used a bit of gasket sealant on. So anyway, so what am I going to do? So it's either split the crankcase, or what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and press the bearing in place. So I have two options. To try and use a G-clamp, which I think my G-clamp will be big enough, but it's possibly not. And to make a basically to make a tube that fits on the outer of the bearing and the inner of the bearing and goes over the crank, and use the G-clamp to try and press the bearing in. Or if that doesn't work, worst case is to take the end. Well, not worst case. Next option is take the engine out, put it on its side in the press, and try and press it. If neither of those two options work, or it's taking a lot of force, I then need to take the crank cases apart, split the crankcases, and then basically look at the inside of this crankcase and see whether I am right and there is a recess or not. And if not, I need to go back to the drawing board. So that's where we're at. So first thing is I need to make this tube, which I'm going to use to press this down. So three things I need to know. I need to know the outer diameter, of which I want to get it slightly smaller. The inner diameter and the length. So I've got this piece of oil-on rod, which is definitely thick enough. I've got my vernier caliper, so I'm going to make those measurements, and then I'm going to, first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it down to length, and then I'm going to bore the hole in the centre, and it's most likely bigger than any of the drills I've got. So then I'll have to use a boring bar to get to the right size, and it'll probably need to go in from both ends, so I'll have to turn it halfway through, and then see if I need to take down any of the side. So that's what I'm going to do. So before going to all this trouble, I just had a little different idea, and the first one was to try the G-clamp first, so that I know whether the engine needs to come out, and the G-clamp doesn't fit. It's just not big enough. Probably would be wide enough, but it's not wide enough to get around the frame. So the motor is going to have to come out. So we'll take the motor out, and then I can actually probably lay up rather than machining this huge piece of rod here, I can probably lay up some other bearings and stuff. You saw I just had this bearing on here. Oh, this bearing, which is a perfect fit in actual fact. So I could use that to press on. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to try and find a selection of other bearings or whatever to press this, and we're going to do it on the press. So I'll crack on, I'll whip the engine out, and then see where we go. So I did end up splitting the cases. I thought to myself, it's only probably a 20-minute job to split them, might as well do it. Anyway, so we've got the case off, and you can see here there is a recess on the inside, so that is effectively, that is the space that we're looking for. So I am going to crack on and press that bearing further in so it's flush with the crankcase, and then I'm going to check it on the case, tighten it down, make sure that the crank has got but it moves freely, it's not tight, and then we can go about rebuilding it. So I'll get on to Ross, whose bike it is, and get him to get us a gasket set. I'll be able to rebuild most of it without the gasket set. This centre gasket is okay. The crankcases do need sealant, but the centre gasket's okay. It will need a new base gasket and ideally a clutch cover gasket, and probably the output shaft. The sprocket gasket as well, that'll probably need, I would think. So there we go. Kind of happy days. Bigger job than I was expecting, but you know, it'll be right.